In the last video we talked about policy chaining, and I had to build kind of a rather large example here to kind of show you how that could plausibly be used in the real world. So what I've done here is I've created master policy, and we saw this in the last video, except now instead of calling loan processing, I'm going to call loan processing global. And so it says up here, if what I've done is I've created a global schema now. And if the request type in the global schema is equal to loan processing case, then I want to call the loan processing global rule. So let's go look at what I've created here. We have the global schemas here, and I've created a little orchestration inside that project. And the global schema looks like this. So what I've done here is I've created three sections. Global header, shared data, and application-specific data. And application-specific data, I've included the loan case schema from the SDK that we've been looking at in the prior examples. So the idea here is that you might have a large canonical message for your whole company. And then inside the global header here, I've got request type and just some generic fields, date, time received, maybe what system it's running, what's the name of my trading partner, what's the status, and what's the error message. And then shared data, I just made up a couple of fields that's not really used in this example. And then this is the same schema that I had before, except notice I added rules fired on the end of it. And that's a true-false Boolean field. So to run this, what I do, well, let me show you the orchestration now. So I have master orchestration. And so this master, the idea is perhaps that all messages could come through the master before they get spun off to their various systems. So we're going to receive the global message, and then here we're going to call the rules, and we're always going to call the master policy. So it's called, actually that's even wrong. It should be master policy here. So I need to redeploy this. So there we go, master policy, and we're going to pass global in. And then what it's going to do is it's going to, that rule, let me show you the rules again. The master policy again is going to call this one, and all I did was just the residency rule. I ignored all the other rules because I had to build this from scratch. So just to prove that this works, I was just using residency only. So I have my positive and negative residency rule. One determines if residency is valid, and the other one determines that it's invalid. And so if the person has lived in his current residence less than 12 months, it's going to be invalid. Right here, residency status is not valid. Otherwise, we're going to check here, residency status is valid. Now I've added this little special trick of mine here called rules fired, or rule fired. I usually call it rules. And so when I have a negative and a positive case like this, I want to make sure at least some rule runs. And so just in case I have bugs in my system, or if I code the rule wrong, what I oftentimes do is I check this flag back in the orchestration. So after I call the rules, I say if rules fired is false, then I throw an error and I stop, because I expect one of these two rules to always fire. And I'm still building the output file name, which is going to be concatenation of the customer ID, which is this long field, the root ID, followed by an underscore, followed by a GUID. So back to the orchestration now. We call the rules. I check to see if the residency is valid or not. And if it is, it's equal to residency status is valid. In that case, what I'm doing is I'm setting my output file name to the output file name that came back from the business rule, and I'm adding underscore valid XML on the end of it. If it's not valid, I add invalid XML on the end of it. And then I simply construct an output message, which is equal to my input message. And then I'm going to use a dynamic port here. So I'm setting the address equal to file : / the name of the disk file I want it to go to, plus string output file name. And so this port is dynamic, and it will go to that directory, and that allows me to name the file exactly what I want. So let's just run this. We're going to go back here. Let's delete that. And in my global schemas, I have here a global message. So let me show you what the global message going in looks like. So here's my header, and my header says loan processing global. Okay. Otherwise, we have down here the case of the loan with some salary and time where you've lived and all that kind of stuff. And I've set rules fired to false to begin with. Okay. So now I'm going to take that file. I'm going to drop it in the input directory. Oh, I got to do one more thing. Before we do this, I'm going to redeploy this because a minute ago I noticed I was actually calling the wrong rule here. So now, for sure, we're calling the master policy rule. So I'm going to just do a quick deploy on this, and I will do that off the video. Okay, so the deploy completed, and I've restarted the BizTalk host. So now I'm going to take the sample file, copy it, and put it in my input directory. And then we'll go to hat to verify that it's going to run. Time right now is 9:27. So it's picked up the file. I'll pause for about 15 seconds. Okay, so here we are at 9:27 a.m. and we see a file received, orchestration completed, and output was completed. So now let's go to our output directory, which is right here, out. Ooh, and notice our file name got messed up. So that kind of implies the rules didn't run. And if we open it, see, the first thing I'm going to check down here is rules fired is still false. And all our statuses are also false. So that means it looks like our master policy probably ran, but the child policy did not run. So more debugging to do here. Okay, right off the bat now I see the problem. In the rule here, we're looking for something called loan processing case. And in the file I dropped, I had loan processing global. So I had the wrong field in the request type there. So probably we would want some additional logic here to say, like, if none of these rules fired, then we also have an issue. So what I would probably do there is put a rules fired in the header. Let me just show you real quick. So I may do that in the second part of this video. So so here in the header, I'm going to add a new element here called rule fired, and I'm going to make that a Boolean. And we'll come back and put the plumbing in for that shortly. So for right now, just to get this to run, what I want to do is go back to my input file here. And I need to just change one thing on it. And that is the request type. So here I just need to change the word global to case. Then I'll drop that file again. Should run real fast now because we didn't have to start the host this time. So you see 9:30, it picked up the file. Orchestration is completed, and the file has now, well, it says started. So the file still hasn't been written. Okay, looks like there's a problem writing out the file. Okay, the problem is I'm still not getting the full file name here. And what it's saying is the file already exists. So that means we still have an issue. So if I go to this output directory, delete it, and then go back and drop the file again. Let's copy it again, make sure I got the current version. So copy this, paste it here. You can see it's already created this file real fast that time. So we definitely have a logic problem. Okay, I think I see what it is here. Originally I was going to try to pass the loan processing case, but here I really need to pass my global message. So I'm going to have to take this, copy, paste, and then here in my action I want to get rid of that and I want to go down here and copy my global schema there. Now while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and put that plumbing in I was talking about a few minutes ago. So here I added this rule fired. So to get that to pick up, I need to do a build and deploy again. So I'll do that off video. So before I deploy it, I want to add just a little bit more code here. This is kind of like a safety checking code. So I'm going to promote this rules fired here. And now I'm going to go to my orchestration. And then immediately after calling the rule, I have a decide shape here that checks if the residency is okay. But before I check that, I want to have another decide shape now, and I want to check to see if the rules have fired. So I'm going to check message global in dot. Okay, it hasn't picked up my IntelliSense yet. Let me just do a build here. Okay, so after the build, I can come back here and I can do global header dot rules fired. If that's true, actually let's just put a not in front of it. If it's not true, we want to do an error. So here we could do a terminate or some type of error handling and say master policy could not find rule to call based on request type equals. Now I need to have my request type also be a promoted field so I can display it out. So right here we'll promote this field. Oftentimes you're going to promote everything in your header because you're going to need access to that in your orchestrations. So now here we were going to add plus message global in dot header dot request type. You need a semicolon here. And here let's call it decide verify some policy was called, which is basically valid request type. Okay, so I'm going to build and deploy the solution and restart the BizTalk host. Okay, off video there, the deploy succeeded, so I'm going to copy my file to test with, paste it here. Now we can go to the output directory and also hat. Okay, I have an error again, xlang error, another classic mistake here. I've passed a schema or a XML to the business rule engine, and the business rule engine was trying to set this flag that says rule fired right here. Whoops, that's not even saved. Oh, well, there's two problems. So this policy is not saved, so let's actually just finish that real quick. That could be the problem. So I need to delete and re-add the schema because I've added new elements to it. So here I want to set rules fired. And when you have a Boolean, it's kind of cool. Over here, you can pick from a list and set true or false. So I want to make sure I save and publish and deploy that policy. Okay, now I need to do one other thing. Is in my test file here, we need to add a rules fired somewhere here in the header, and it should be the last field in the header. And I'll set it to false. Okay, now I'm going to test this again. But actually I'm going to start the BizTalk host. Sometimes when you change a business rule like that, it may take 60 seconds or so before the BizTalk host sees the new rule. So by starting and stopping the host, you're guaranteed to get the current business rules. I believe there's a registry setting if you want it to refresh faster. So we've done that, and now we're going to copy, paste our file. Let's make sure our output directory is empty. It is. Sample file, copy, input directory, paste, and we go to hat. Okay, I have another bug, another human error here. In hat, it shows me the receive was received, but I never see the orchestration started. And the orchestration actually did start, but sometimes hat doesn't actually show that. So I went to the BizTalk application viewer, the event viewer, and I looked at my error message, and what it says is that rule fired was not found in the header. And so again, I made a very sort of dumb mistake here. I think in the past I've called it rules fired, and now today I called it rule fired. So I need to be consistent and call it by the proper name. So now it's called rule fired. Let's just verify in the schema that indeed it's rule, not rules, plural. Okay, so now we've corrected our file. We'll go copy it again. This time, without even going to hat, see how fast it ran. It says 1, that's my customer ID. Then I have a GUID, and then the invalid here means that it's not, the residency requirements were not met. So now I'm going to open that file, and now indeed you do see the rules fired is true. And then the following down here, some rule fired down here, and it did set the residency status. And the only thing is it says it's valid here. So perhaps I have one thing bad in my orchestration then. Right here I said if residency status is valid. And let's look at that output file one more time. Residency status is valid. That looks like the same thing. Residency status is valid. Just checking everything, the spelling. See right there, there's an extra little E in there. Another human error. So if I spelled residency correct, then things would have worked better. So in my rule, I have a typo. So remember, you have to copy the whole rule again. You got to come up here and say copy, paste, find the residency rule here, and this time don't put extra letters in the word residency. Let's make sure negation is okay. That one's fine. So we save, publish, deploy, and now again, to make sure that BizTalk picks up the new rule, it's just safer to come over here and restart the host, and then we can drop our file again. So let's delete that one just to be clear. So while that's running. It should only take a few seconds since we restarted the host. Let's do one other thing. Let's create a second file here. This is global message sample 1. Let's save this. This global message sample 2. And in this one we're going to put a lower residency requirement. The person has not lived in the same place for as much time. So here, place of residence, let's change that to 9 months. Okay, meanwhile our first file hopefully is finished, and now it says valid. And now I'm going to drop our second file, sample 2. You see how fast it ran that time, and it says invalid. So if they live there 12 months or more, it's valid. If they live there 9 months or less, it's invalid. So, sorry that was kind of a long chase down of some bugs, but just to recap what we've done here, we have created a policy chaining where we call the master policy. The master policy then looks at some field in my header, in this case request type. If the request type is like A, I call policy A. If it's B, I call policy B. And I could have 20 other policies all called by the master policy. Then I also check to see, there's one other case we should do here is what if I put a bad policy. So we should be testing for that as well. So let's create here, take our sample 2, and let's save that as sample 3. And the difference here is we're going to put a bad word here. So let's say we just put loan processing, or just loan for instance. Now we're going to go drop that file, sample 3. And we don't expect an output file this time. So what we'll do is we'll go to hat and we should see a terminate message. It still hasn't happened yet. Okay, something went wrong there. So let's go look at the application event viewer. We have an Xlang error, which we definitely did not want. We'd rather have a graceful shutdown error. Okay, we have here decide if some policy was called or not. That's our logic after the rules. And it says the string false is not a valid Boolean value. Okay, that's another dumb little simple thing to fix. Is right here, I always forget this, in XML, basic 101 XML, false is lowercase, not capital. So in both cases here, we should have a little f. So what it was saying was that's not valid XML. So now we're going to take that file, drop it again, which was global sample 3. And remember, this file had an invalid request type. So now it did terminate. And if we go over here and read the termination message, it says, master policy could not find rule to call based on request type equal loan. So that's a pretty clear message that, like, if this were a job in production now, someone could say, okay, someone dropped a file into the system and gave it the request type loan, and there was no rule to call from the master policy. So you would go to the master policy here, and you would look at all the different rules, and you would see if there was any rule where the request type was loan. And you see that there's not. It should be loan processing case, or again, we could have 5 other rules here, but right now this is the only one we have. So that completes this demonstration on how and why you might want to use policy chaining. And remember, to do policy chaining, we created a C# and we passed the name of the policy we want to call along with the XML message.